to the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman, co-hosting today with Democracy Now!'s Nermeen Sheikh.
Thank you, Amy. And welcome to our listeners around the country and around the world. The Obama administration yesterday accused 2 Iranian agents of plotting to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in the United States. In a 21-page indictment filed in New York federal court, the 2 men were charged with conspiring to kill Saudi ambassador Adel al-Jubeir, Iranian-American Mansour Arbab-Siar, now in U.S. custody, and Iranian official Gholam Shakouri, reportedly a member of Iran's Special Foreign Actions Unit known as the Quds Force. Justice Department officials say the men tried to hire a member of a Mexican drug cartel to carry out the assassination with a bomb attack while al-Jubeir dined at his favorite Washington restaurant. The hitman was actually an informant for the Drug Enforcement Agency. Arbab-Siar allegedly agreed to pay $1.5 million for the assassination and arranged a down payment of $100,000 to the informant. He was arrested on September 29th at JFK Airport in New York on a return flight from Mexico, where he had been denied entry after agreeing to meet the informant and use himself as collateral for the rest of the payment. Once in custody, he cooperated with the Federal Bureau of Investigation in making calls to his cousin and alleged co-conspirator Shakouri in Iran to confirm and record details of the plot. U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder said the U.S. would hold Iran responsible for the plot.
The complaint alleges that this conspiracy was conceived, was sponsored, and was directed from Iran, and constitutes a flagrant violation of U.S. and international law, including a convention that explicitly protects diplomats from being harmed. In addition to holding these individual conspirators accountable for their alleged role in this plot, the United States is committed to holding Iran accountable for its actions. Arbab-Siar and Shakouri are charged with conspiracy to murder a foreign official, conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction, and conspiracy to commit an act of international terrorism, among other charges.
That was U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder. Shortly after Holder's announcement, the U.S. Treasury announced it was initiating sanctions against 5 people allegedly connected to the plot. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ramin Mehmanparast called the allegations untrue and baseless and said the incident was, quote, a comedy show fabricated by America. Mexico's Deputy Foreign Minister Julian Ventura said in a news conference yesterday that Mexican authorities had detained suspect Arbab-Siar when he tried to enter the country on September 28th.
Last September 28th, the National Migration Institute identified Arbab-Siar, who was prevented from entering the country because he didn't have the necessary paperwork, according to the General Migration Law. Following the rules established by the International Civil Aviation Organization, as well as conventions and valid international agreements, the foreigner was returned to the starting point of his journey. He was arrested at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York.
Mexico's Deputy Foreign Minister Julian Ventura speaking yesterday at a news conference. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton congratulated U.S. intelligence and said the alleged plot would further isolate Tehran.
It was a terrific achievement by our law enforcement and intelligence communities, and we will be consulting with our friends and partners around the world about how we can send a very strong message that this kind of action, which violates international norms, must be ended, and other areas where we can cooperate more closely in order to send a strong message to Iran and further isolate it from the international community will also be considered. Thank you.
The Saudi embassy in Washington issued a statement calling the plot, quote, a despicable violation of international norms, standards, and conventions, and is not in accordance with the principles of humanity, unquote. Iran was not specifically mentioned. To talk more about the incident, we go to Seattle to talk to Toby Jones, assistant professor of history at Rutgers University, who's previously International Crisis Group's political analyst in the Persian Gulf. He's author of Desert Kingdom, How Oil and Water Forged Modern Saudi Arabia. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Toby Jones. Can you respond to what the Justice Department has alleged, the indictments against these 2 men?
Well, certainly we should, keep in mind that Iran is capable of considerably, sort of dangerous and provocative things in the world, but there's not very much in the way of detail here. The affidavit, the complaint that was released, contains sort of an account of the investigation as it was carried out over the course of 2011. But there's still a lot that we don't know about what the connections are with Iran and who in Iran might have possibly been interested in this. I mean, there are huge questions about complicity and about what the strategic value of this would be for Iran. I mean, why carry out an attack on U.S. soil? What kinds of interests or objectives would they hope to serve? These sorts of things have not been made clear by observers or by American officials, and so there's lots that's left unknown at this point.
Could you say a little, Toby, about what you think Iran could possibly gain? What is some of the speculation?
Well, some of the speculation is that Iran seeks to damage both American and Saudi interests, their relationship with one another, that Iran might be feeling somewhat muscular in the region as a result of both the Arab Spring and the erosion of American power in the Middle East, and that from this position of strength, or perceived strength inside of Tehran, that Iran might want to send both a message of its abilities, its capacity to carry out these kinds of things, but also to seek to further erode American power and to stretch the ability of the Saudis to respond appropriately. But that's not entirely compelling. We know in the course of 2011 that the Arab regimes in the region have felt a considerable amount of strain and pressure as a result of democratic uprisings from Egypt to Bahrain. And Saudi Arabia has responded by pursuing the course of counter-revolution, attempting to contain the fallout not only in Bahrain but across the region. Iran also feels pressure. 2 years ago, it was confronted with its own green revolution, the green movement, in an attempt to sort of check the authority of Ahmadinejad and other authorities in Tehran. And I think Iran is worried about the possible spillover effect of any kind of populist movement. So I think it's an exaggeration to say that Iran feels a sense of strength or a sense of expanded ability, a heightened ability, if you will, to negatively influence American or Saudi interests in the region. Rather, Iran's in a vulnerable position. It's surrounded by American military power. It's isolated from the international community. It's hard to see what it would gain from taking an incredibly provocative sort of move like this. And frankly, it's out of character. I mean, Iran has in the past engaged in assassinations against its own dissidents. It has been alleged to have relationships with global terrorist networks that have targeted Western civilians. But this would be an escalation, a considerable escalation, and it's hard to see how it would serve Iran's agenda.
Let's talk about the targets that we're talking about. And again, we have to reiterate, we do not know anything about this except for what the government has told us. And for journalists, that's very difficult. So again, this is what the U.S. government is alleging in major news conferences yesterday. The plotters, one of them in U.S. custody, also targeted Israel's embassy in Washington, as well as the embassies of Israel and Saudi Arabia in Argentina, according to federal law enforcement officials. Israel and Saudi Arabia not exactly friendly with each other.
No, that's right. But although we have to keep in mind that over the last few years, there's been an interesting convergence when it comes to Middle East policy and Middle East interests, where Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States continue to pursue the most outspoken and hard line against Iran. When the Shah fell in 1979, American policy crystallized very quickly to both vilify and criminalize the Iranian regime. And ever since, over the last 3 decades, according to American political discourse, Iran has become the center of evil in the Middle East, responsible for all kinds of things that it may or may not have connections to. And certainly Israel, in an Israeli policy, over the last few years, has also come to view Iran as an existential threat. And Iran's president has played an important role in sort of fostering this by making provocative statements, denying the Holocaust, and so on. But it's interesting what many folks might consider to be, if not enemies, at least rivals in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Israel. Their interests actually align perfectly when it comes to Iran. They both seek to contain Iranian power and influence and to roll it back where possible.
And what about Syria? Syria is Iran's closest ally, Arab ally in the region. What role might have Syria played in this alleged plot, or the interest of Iran in this plot?
Right. Well, there's no indication that that Syria is involved at all, although there is the cryptic reference to a non-Iranian bank having been responsible for wiring the $100,000 to a non-named American bank, or at least U.S.-based bank. So Syria has not been named in the affidavit, as far as I could tell. But it's certainly possible that the situation in Syria, the erosion of Assad's power, the continuing protests there, the pressure that puts on Iran in the region as well, if Iran, if the sort of the powers that be in Iran are somehow responsible for this or have orchestrated this, that Syria and sort of what's going on there might be part of their calculation.
You know, actually, October 21st is the 35th anniversary of the bombing of the former Chilean diplomat, Orlando Letelier, and his assistant, Ronnie Moffett, on Embassy Row in Washington, D.C. Toby Jones. It was September 21st.
Right. Well,
Go ahead.
Right. So, well, I mean, you're right. I mean, we have moments, and Iran too has allegedly been involved in foreign assassination plots or strikes against community centers in Argentina in the past. I mean, this certainly resonates. I mean, it's a frightening prospect, right, that Iran might be plotting, acts of terrorism against American interests or against allied interests elsewhere, whether it's the Saudis or somebody else, right? It raises the specter of a kind of, a shadowy nemesis that wishes to do us ill will. If true, it's frightening. But there are lots of holes in the story, and while we have these moments, the historical anecdotes, there are not necessarily parallels. I mean, in the earlier example, the Chileans went after former diplomats. I mean, Iran wasn't. These two Iranians weren't charged with looking to strike Iranian dissidents, but rather with looking to strike at at Saudi targets, at a strong ally of the United States in the Middle East. And in that context, it's remarkably different. But it also is, it raises important questions about what American political interests are served by revealing the details of this right now. We know that the United States has pursued an uneven policy in the Middle East with respect to the Arab Spring. It is where it has championed the cause of democracy, or at least the overthrow of autocracy in places like Libya. It has been much less clear or certain in its position when it comes to Bahrain or Saudi Arabia. And in many ways, Iran is a central part of American uncertainty in the Persian Gulf. The United States agrees with Saudi Arabia that it doesn't want to see Iranian power expanded there. Revealing the indictment or sort of having the indictment go forward, unsealing the case at this particular moment, provides the Americans with a great deal of political cover and continuing to pursue a political line and a policy vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia and Bahrain in the Gulf that continues to put Iran at the center of the story.
So do you think it's actually possible, Toby Jones, that the U.S. could use this as a pretext for military intervention in Iran, as some have speculated?
Well, there have already been calls for a more strident kind of strategic response, that the Americans should look for ways to punish those in Iran. I believe the Vice President came out either last night or early this morning and said that those in Iran that were responsible for this should be held accountable. It's unclear what those measures would be. I mean, there's been some discussion of renewed sanctions or intensified sanctions going to the Security Council and looking for international support to pursue, sort of a path that's frankly unclear. And there are hawkish voices in the United States and elsewhere that would like nothing more, including in Saudi Arabia and Israel, that would like nothing more than a military strike. So as unlikely as that seems, given the debacle of Iraq, the complicated nature of the situation across the Middle East right now, it's not impossible that there are strategists in the United States who will see this as an opportunity to argue for and call for a military strike against Iran.
Toby Jones, we want to thank you very much for being with us, Assistant Professor of History at Rutgers University, previously International Crisis Group's political analyst in the Persian Gulf. His author of Desert Kingdom, How Oil and Water Forge Modern Saudi Arabia. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report.